Hi guys, Viking Reefing here. If you've been following along the journey of this Niosopus 300, you'll know that I have a pair of orange spotted filefish in here. I've never seen this amount of interest in knowing more about the ins and outs on how to successfully adapt a fish to aquarium life. So ask and thou shalt receive. In this video, I'll go over how I acquired them, how I first introduced them into my QT tank, how I weaned them on to prepared foods, and everything in between, and some observations that I've made whilst keeping these guys. I believe I've had them now for about 3 months or so, perhaps 4. So I think I have a fairly good grasp on the requirements of these fish. And I want to preference everything by saying that although I think I can give you a method that will probably yield a fairly high success rate, probably a lot higher than people have had in the past, this isn't a fish for just anyone. I don't want any one of you guys to watch this video and see that I have these 2 specimens doing well and just go out and buy a couple of orange spotted filefish just randomly. They are very demanding fish, and I'd probably say that they are suitable for a very small niche of the reef keeping hobby. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. So firstly, how did I get these fish? Well, kind of by accident actually. When I first started thinking about this Nios, I had an idea that I at some point would like to try a pair or a trio of these guys in here. And I talked to the owner of my LFS about that, and lo and behold, like 2 weeks or something afterwards, he calls me up in kind of a panic mode and says that, hey, I've just received a trio of orange spotted filefish by mistake. I can't keep them here. Do you want them? And at that point, I was still some months away from receiving this tank. So I was hesitant initially, and I hadn't really planned for the amount of work that I figured would probably go into weaning these guys onto aquarium repair. But since me taking them probably gave them a better chance of survival than them staying at the LFS and potentially just starving there or getting picked up by someone who didn't really know what kind of challenge they were getting into. So I picked up a trio. 2 of the 3 were in decent enough shape. They were fairly thin, but the 3rd one, he was emaciated. You could see every bone in that poor guy's body. I did get him to eat as well, but unfortunately he perished fairly rapidly. So I'd probably say if you're looking into getting these fish, make sure that the supply chain is very short, because they will do very poorly at like wholesalers and stuff like that. I would advise you to get them straight from the ocean. Have like an exporter just ships them to your LFS, and the whole process might take a week at max before you get them into your tank. So firstly, when I got them into my QT tank, which is, as most of you probably know, not a sterile QT tank. I don't subscribe to that methodology whatsoever. So it's basically just another reef tank that's kept separate from my main system. I got them in there. I saw that they were picking at pods and stuff, which was very positive. But what I did, just to make sure that they started getting some sort of nutrients into them, I snipped off a bunch of coral frags from my large tank, which has a lot of acros for them to snack on. And speaking of them eating acros, there's a misconception that they are actually eating coral polyps and flesh, which is completely incorrect. You could basically just look at these fish and you'll see that the anatomy of their mouth won't allow them to chomp down on a polyp or something. It's basically just a long straw. They kind of look like a anteater or something like that. So what they do is they basically just pick a bit of the coral, they irritate it, and then they suck up the mucus from that coral. So when I knew that they were actually feeding, and I saw a feeding response from them picking at the acros, I firstly, did what most people will do. I tried feeding them stuff like mysis, cyclopes, flakes, pellets, mastic. They were showing very little, if any, interest in any of that initially, which I basically expected, but guy can hope. So what I did then, which was something that I had planned and I've had success with finicky fish before, who primarily pick on corals, is that I took a bunch of coral skeletons, such as this. This is a millipora. Since I'm a horrible reef keeper, I do have a collection of dead acros. But what I basically did was I took mastic and I shoved it into different spots of the corals here. And I actually got a feeding response fairly rapidly from that. They were kind of hesitant at first. They were like just picking around and didn't really figure out that the mastic was what they were going for. I think they were just basically picking at the coral. But after a while, they realized that the mastic was actually something that was edible. So then they really focused in on the mastic. I think that took, say, 2 or 3 days. Once I saw them eating the mastic with a fair amount of vigor, I then started mixing stuff into the mastic. Primarily I used mysis, which, funnily enough, wasn't that successful. They sometimes would pick at the mysis, but most of the time they just spit them out. I then tried some different kinds of pellets and flakes. What worked the very best was the polyp pellets from Pantaray. These things, they actually contain coral polyps. And it stands to reason that they actually like them, since it does have a, taste of corals. So when I saw that they were actively feeding on the pieces of pellets that was stuck into the mastic, I tried removing the coral skeletons and then not feeding mastic for a bit. They were kind of hesitant to go for the pellets initially, but after, say, 2 or 3 more days, they were hungry enough to start picking at them. And after another couple of days, they were actually feeding on pellets out of the water column. I think the whole process of just weaning them onto prepared foods took a little over a week before I felt decently comfortable to just remove all the live acros from the QT tank. And after this, it's actually been kind of a breeze, to be honest. Right now, they are feeding on all kinds of pellets. They also eat flakes out of the water column. And all the food that they eat, it just comes straight from this Eheim auto feeder. So I feed them 4 times a day via this. And I'll occasionally give them a snack of mastic every now and again. Let's see here. I'll give them a pinch of these things. You have to kind of grind them up because their mouths are very, very small. So let's see here if they will be showing some interest. Oh yes, they are. I want to apologize for the tank. It's still a bit dirty. Since this is a new tank, I've been dealing with some fair amount of uglies in it. I had a huge dino outbreak and cyano, and apparently I have alva in my system as well. which I've been fighting with, like urchins and stuff. But it's turning a corner, so this should be a thing of the past in a week or so. As you can see, they are both eating out of the water column and picking at stuff on the bottom. I have a male and a female, and I think keeping multiple orange-spotted filefish together seems to be something that will increase your success rate, since there's a fair amount of food competition between these guys. And I've seen that in the past as well with other finicky fish. If they see another fish eat, they feel like, oh, I'm missing out, I'll better eat as well. So if you want to attempt keeping these guys, I'd definitely get a pair. They are decently simple to sex. The males, this is the male, they have a spotted fin on their belly, and the female's fin is completely solid, like you can see here. You can see there's some aggression during feeding time, which I think is fairly beneficial, just to keep them actively feeding. I think a tank such as this, with the stocking that will be going into it, is pretty ideal for these guys. This will be a predominantly LPS tank and some softies and feather dusters and stuff, and I'll only keep small and very calm fish in here. If you don't have a massive amount of acros, they will definitely be outcompeted for food in a larger tank if you have a bunch of tanks and things of that nature. So for most people, the most suitable environment will be a very calm tank with very little competition. Since they are very slow feeders, you can see here, they're mostly just swimming around, picking at stuff that's been settling at the bottom. From what little information I've managed to find on the internet, a harem situation will also work out very well. So you keep multiple females with one male. And there have been successful spawnings in captivity, which is also very cool. Currently, I don't have enough time to dedicate to try and breeding these guys, but if I see active breeding behavior and I have a bit more time on my hands, I will definitely be giving that a go. Captive bred orange-spotted filefish would be really freaking cool. Something that you read online is that, oh, they can't be kept with corals, they'll kill acros, they will eat any sort of fleshy corals, and what have you. That has not been my experience whatsoever. They've been fine with hammers, frog spawns, and goniopora. I will be adding stuff like acants, trachees, and things of that nature to this tank as well. And I don't foresee any sort of a problem with that. I have kept a branch of Acropora in here, just to supplement their diet a little bit. It's a single branch of green slimer here. I've had this here for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's completely fine. They'll pick at it occasionally, but the only negative I've seen is reduced polyp extension, and I don't really have a lot of polyp extension or a big tank anyways, due to all the angels and stuff like that picking on the corals. Funnily enough, I haven't had much success getting these things to eat frozen foods. They will pick at mysis, brine shrimp, cyclopes, but not with any great vigor whatsoever. They mostly feed just on flakes and pellets. I feed them the Ocean Nutrition Formula 2 flakes. I also have some mashed up Pantaray pellets, both the sponge and the polyp pellets. And I also do 3 Niles pellets and yes, feed from Aquaforest, and they seem to love all of those options. The pellets from Panteray is definitely their favorite. They are also very soft, so it's easy for them to get them into their mouths and actually swallow them, since they can't chew on anything really. I've tried the stuff like the Ocean Nutrition Formula 1 and Formula 2 pellets as well, but they just seem to be a bit too hard for them. So unless they can really soften up and dissolve for a long time, they won't be able to eat those. They seem to be able to handle flow relatively well. I'm running 4 Nero 3s in here with a fair amount of flow. They're not exactly at 100%, but they seem to be fairly good with that. Lastly, I would like to say that if you do the steps that I did, and you really take your time, and you make sure that you have a separate quarantine tank to really acclimatize these guys, I wouldn't throw them into a display tank straight away. I think that's just a horrible idea, and fairly irresponsible as well. You'll have a fair chance of success with keeping orange-spotted filefish. They are not at all impossible, like a lot of people will say. They do require a fair amount of work on your part. But lastly, my plan B, if I couldn't get these things to start feeding, would be to just throw them into this tank, which has a ton of acros in it. And I think it's fairly unethical for someone to pick up these filefish if they don't have at least the option of throwing them into a very big tank like this, so they can just graze on acros and just basically live as they do in nature. So if you don't have a very big reef tank that you can throw them into full of acros, don't just count on your ability to wean them onto prepared foods, and that's like your only option, or they will starve. That might sound a bit negative. However, this is not a fish that just anyone should keep. You should have a fair amount of experience in the reefing hobby, and probably some decent success with other finicky species before you start thinking about giving these things a go. Alright, I hope you learned something about keeping these very interesting fish. These are some of the most rewarding fish that I've ever kept. They are such goofballs, they have wonderful character, and they are, in my opinion, one of the top 3 or 4 most beautiful fish that you can actually keep. If you have any additional questions that you didn't get an answer to, please just post them down below in the comments. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out, and it spreads the video around as well. If you want to see their progression, I would advise you to hit the subscribe button and the actual real subscribe button as well, which is the notification bell. If you don't hit that, it's up to the YouTube gods if you ever see my videos. I think that's all I have to say about the orange-spotted filefish at the moment. I've only kept them for 4 months, so I'm quite sure that there will be many more insights along the way of keeping these guys. Thank you very much for watching, happy reefing, and have a good day. Bye!